everybody. How are we today? Awesome. Okay. Uh, Welcome, Hari Saab. Um, so we decided to change this format a little bit and skip the introduction part because we thought we'll get more meat or more time with Hari Saab in a conversation, in a free-flowing conversation. And so apologies, Devika and Ruhel, you were not aware of this, but this was a last-minute decision. So sorry for the change in formats. But I am a little so. It's a very uphill task for me. I am supposed to be introducing somebody who has already authored 8 books, and this brief introduction in 2 minutes is really is really challenging. But
No, let's escape the conversation.
he's very modest. Okay, I spoke to him for the first time yesterday, and he told me, "Okay, it's okay. You're not from the startup ecosystem, but that's what adds to whatever fundamental questions you'll ask me. Bring out more for our audience." So I'm very happy and charged up with that. So Hari Saab is actually somebody who wears many hats. He's an author, as you would have read in some part of the introduction there, or if you're gone on the IBLF website. He's also the co-founder of the Artha School of Entrepreneurship. So I asked him, why Artha, sir? And would you want to add a line there?
Yeah, so Artha actually means both money as well as meaning. So most entrepreneurs look for both, and that's how we named it as Artha School for Entrepreneurship.
Very interesting, right? So he's a co-founder there. He's an evangelist, a thought leader. He's somebody that the startup ecosystem looks up to. Looks up to in a lot of awe, and finds inspiration from Hari Saab. And naturally, because he's written so many books and spoken to so many startup founders, and has written on a variety of topics. So it's going to be he's a alumnus of IIT Madras and IIM Calcutta, and he's also been on the leadership team of more than 5 startups, 3 of which are unicorns today.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to speak with Hari Saab, and I want to first dive into this question since you've authored 8 books. How did you meet the co-author of Winning Middle India, the story of India's new age entrepreneurs?
So Bala Srinivasa is my co-author,
Yes.
and both of us worked for the same startup called Amba Research.
Okay.
So Amba Research was in the space of investment research outsourcing, which is a KPO, one would call it. So we did work for American investment banks, European investment banks, money managers. We initiated research reports for them, and we wrote out a lot of the stories from India. And he was the global head of sales and marketing. I was the global head of human resources, part of the same team. And evening, many times we shared the same car. We drove home together. Either he brought his car or I brought my car. We lived close by, and we got to talk about some interesting stuff. He lived most of his life in the US, and India was a bit new to him, was interesting to him. So he would love listening to stories of India, stories of Bharat and insights. And when the pandemic happened and we were all barricaded behind our homes, we were wondering, how India might probably look 25 years down the road, or what shape it is taking at this point of time. And that's how we thought there is a big idea here to be written about, how India is taking shape, and, Nehru's dream of India's tryst with destiny. So I think, the top 10 million households achieved their tryst with destiny post Y2K and the setting up of the services industry, but then it continued to elude many other Indians who were at the bottom of the pyramid or middle of the pyramid. So we thought we'd talk about how life is changing for Indians at the middle of the pyramid, and that's how this book came about.
Super. In fact, that's my next question, because the book is titled Winning Middle India. So are you speaking of the middle class, so to say, in India? How I know that you've also been very modest in the book to say that, look, this is not such a scientific explanation,
Yes.
but there is a lot of data, a lot of statistics basis which we are calling this Middle India. So could you, for our audience, also decode what this Middle India is?
Yeah, so I think in the book itself, we said we are the first to concede that there is nothing very structured or very scientific about our definition of Middle India. But the way we would like to look at it is as follows. So if you classify all households in India basis, household income, you would have the top 10 million households whose household income is about $40,000 per annum. You would have the next 40 million households whose income ranges between $25,000 to $40,000. And then you have 120 million households who are somewhere between $4,000 to $25,000, and the remaining 30 odd million households which have an income of below $4,000. So what we are talking about is those 120 million households with a wide range of income. $4,000 to $25,000 is not a very narrow range. It's quite a broad range. And the reason why we are, including such a broad range is that we think that, a lot of solutions are taking shape for people across the spectrum of income ranges. And we think that sometimes, there are people who are, in terms of consumption habits, reflect much higher than the $4,000, and therefore sometimes the definition, the band is not as broad as one might think it is. And this is a very, variegated, very, it's not just a very homogeneous group of people. This group, is broken up across languages, across distributed in geographies with different degrees of economic development. There are millennials, there are non-millennials in this group. So it's a fairly wide group. So, but we just thought, in terms of income range and in terms of the solutions that are taking shape for changing their lives, we thought this is a good group to address. Because, there are really no solutions at this point of time taking shape for the bottom of the pyramid, which is 130. Probably after these get addressed, there will be some hope, that the last 130 also will find their tryst with destiny.
Nice. And since you spoke about this multiple Indias, right? And really no pun intended here, but it takes me to Veer Das's "I come from two Indias" statement. But what do you mean by, so really there are multiple Indias, and you've tried to cover that in your book, where there is one India which is trying to get access to, say, basic education, healthcare, all of that, and there's another India which, in your statement, is that we live in, like you and me, who live in the metros and who have the 10-minute grocery delivery accessible to them.
Correct.
So what is this multiple India scenario that you've covered in your book?
Yeah, so I think, multiple Indias can be seen at from this perspective, which is the top 10 million households, are extremely well off. And it's always easy for businesses and entrepreneurs to find solutions and create products for the wealthy, because it's always possible to make money out of selling those products and services. So, the last 10 years, I would say 14, 15 years, from 2008 until almost 2016, about 8 to 10 years, a lot of startups that got built tried solving problems of the top 10 million households, whether they were a Zomato or a Big Basket or a Flipkart. All of them began solving problems, solving for the problems and inconveniences of this group. And it's almost saturated now. You can clearly see it, sometimes we are ending up solving problems that don't exist. For example, 10-minute grocery delivery for this 10 million households is a problem that does not exist. Yet there is a lot of attention and capital coming into this. But I think there's a realization that enough is enough. That segment, most of the problems are solved. You need to now go deeper and solve problems for the remaining, categories of 400 million Indians that we talked about. But it's not easy to solve problems of people with low disposable incomes. But I think a bunch of factors have come together. And those factors are technology. Those factors are, the digital public goods that India has consciously chosen, which is Aadhaar, which is UPI. India went down the path of creating these digital public goods and helping, make small cost, low value transactions. Whereas internet in the US evolved along the line of advertising. So internet in the US is ad driven. Europe is all data privacy. China is a walled garden. India consciously made the strategic choice of going the path of creating digital public goods and facilitating low cost transactions. So some of these are enabling businesses which were difficult to create in a profitable manner earlier on, now to suddenly be able to create solutions that can profitably solve problems of the next 400 million Indians. Now coming to the bottom 130 million households, I think that's a problem that's not easy to solve, because those folks don't have access to basic stuff. They don't have access to basic education. They don't have access to even food. They don't have access to justice, equality. They don't have access to many things. So I think the way the problems need to be solved for those is very different. So free market economics is not going to address the problems of those at the bottom of the pyramid. I think social reformers, social entrepreneurs need to create the right soil conditions at that level for market or free market economics to take over. But I think the middle India, which is the 120 million households, is ripe for free market intervention. So entrepreneurs who are there to create, profitable businesses, build for profit. I think this market is now really amenable. Prior to that, many people tried creating businesses. For example, you have Kevin Care, right? That was a company which was there in a small town. They realized that the founder, Chinni Krishnan, was an amazingly, prescient entrepreneur. He figured out that people in, those who are low income or low disposable incomes, their aspirations are quite high, except that they don't have, money or cash flows to buy bulk products in bulk quantities. So all he did was simply created sachets, which is shampoos in sachets, talcum powders in sachets, and people began consuming this. So this was a real consumer insight, which is deeply understanding consumer, behaviors and thought process to be able to build a business around that. And good businesses got built. HUL completely copied the sachet idea of Chinni Krishnan. So I think what happened in between was that, many businesses could not be built in the same manner because the technologies were not sufficient to create these profitable businesses. But I think suddenly all these factors that I talked about, digital public goods, and the ecosystem taking maturity, VC funds becoming available, people wanting to bet on creating big business in this space, all of those have come together. It's created some kind of a tipping point because of which I think it's suddenly very interesting to solve those problems and create big businesses.
And C.K. Ranganathan and Kevin Kerr is like a huge inspiration, especially for people, all of us from the South. And you've captured that story very well. Would you like to share with us how, I mean, this is digressing a bit, but since it's covered in the book, how did they reach or come to that name, Kevin Kerr? Because you've explained that very beautifully.
Yeah, Kevin Kerr, if I remember, that CK stands for Chinni Krishnan. Kevin, Cavin, Kare. CK stands for Chinni Krishnan. Chinni Krishnan was, CK Ranganathan's father. And Kevin also means beauty in the Tamil language. I don't think I pronounced it correctly, but it does mean beauty pronounced correctly. So I think it's a combination of these two which created this wonderful name.
Nice. So a large chunk of the book also talks about, like you rightly said, about improvements in banking, in the digital payment ecosystem, in how Aadhaar came to existence, and how today it has changed the lives of so many Indians. As somebody who has been researching on this book and co-authored this book, there must be a lot of very interesting insights and statistics and data that you would have had access to. I remember some fun data from the book, like you mentioned. Does anybody know what they pay for one phone call today? A mobile to mobile phone call? Would you know? 5 paise? Okay. At least maybe, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but at least you think or you're aware of that. I don't know because I only know what is the total overall monthly expense I pay Airtel, because I don't get into the detailing of what the phone call is, right? How much it is charged, how much I am being charged. But one interesting thing that came up from the book was the first phone call, if I understand. Would you like to share that story?
I mean, I don't know if it's a story, but the first phone call was between, Jyoti Basu, who was the chief minister of West Bengal those days, and Sukram, who was the telecommunications minister. And those were the days when, the call cost used to be about 16 rupees per minute. Today, it's almost free. That's the, path that the telecom industry has taken. Jio has been able to change a lot of that, change paradigms of that.
Right. And 10 minutes of the call then was, I think, you were talking about the average,
Yes, 160 rupees is the daily income for, many families in India.
So that was an interesting insight. Also, the fact that in 2011, I think 40% of the Indian population had bank accounts, but today it's about more than 80%
more than
of them.
90% of them, yes.
Right, right. So are there any more interesting numbers, statistics that you would like to share with our listeners here?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of interesting things, and maybe one or two things which I also don't understand. I would love it if somebody can answer the question for me, which is, I think this UPI payments took off in a very big way post-pandemic. So India was a country that really loved cash. Post demonetization, suddenly all the currency went out of circulation. But the interesting thing is that almost all the currency that went back into the banking system, which is almost 3 lakh crores, came back into circulation very quickly before you could even wonder what happened to the cash. It came back into circulation. But pandemic changed some of that, and people began to go digital in a very big way, demonetization and pandemic. And people who were all above 55 years, found it difficult to, do digital transactions. Many of them were stuck in small towns, away from their families, and they had to suddenly learn how to make these digital transactions. And in July 22, in that month alone, the number of transactions, the value of transactions on UPI was almost $130 billion, which is almost $1.6 trillion on an annual basis. And this is nearly half of India's GDP. So half of India's GDP went through, a digital format. But of course, there's double counting in the way this is done. But nevertheless, it's a very big number that went through. So one question that I have never been able to figure out is that with such a large amount of transactions taking place on the digital platform, how come the currency is still as much as it was digital? Amount of currency in circulation is still the same, which means the velocity of money must have significantly come down. Velocity of money is, I'm sure anyone who knows a little bit of economics would get this figure. So velocity of money has come down. So it is idle in many places. So why is it even there? This is a question that I have never been able to, find an answer to. I've spoken to some economists, but never been able to get an answer. Some interesting facts about, an amount of digital transactions taking place is quite fascinating.
And the birth of so many fintechs after the whole demonetization era. Right. Which takes me to my next question. The whole premise of your book is the new age entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs who are solving for India. Their solutions can also solve problems of the world, but they are keeping India as their focal point and solving India's problems, and especially Middle India's problems. I come from a small town called Belgaum, so I really connected with your book, because there have been so many case studies. You've highlighted those so well, whether it is Dehat, whether it is Rail Yatri, so would you like to share a few maybe stories or maybe a few things about some of the entrepreneurs that you've shared in your book, and things that stayed with you as somebody who's interacted with them and somebody who thinks that these are people who are going to inspire the next generation?
Yeah, so I think, solving problems for people with low disposable income is, to me, very inspiring, because it needs a lot of hard work. It requires you to go down to these tier 3, tier 4 towns in India, understand consumer pain points, and understand exactly why they are not adopting or adapting, new ideas. So that requires some really hard work. So it requires, for example, trust to be built. So all of these companies that we talked about in the book, whether it's a Razorpay or whether it's a Dehat or whether it's Animal, which is about cattle trade marketplace for cattle, all of these founders, I think, many of them grew up in tier 2, tier 3 towns of India. So to be able to solve problems for a certain set of consumers, you must have felt the same pain points, because if you deeply do not feel those same pain points, and if you've lived in a more affluent society, it becomes very difficult to really relate to those problems and come up with solutions that are meaningful for them. So I think the big starting point is that many of these founders come from those parts of India. So if you see, India is changing in a very big way. And this is mirrored in the way the kind of films that are coming up. Cricket, for example, is a big mirror. So for example, if you look at IPL teams in India at this point of time, when I was young, the Ranji Trophy used to be won by, Bombay, Delhi, Karnataka, Bangalore, which is Hyderabad, most of the times, almost 90% of the times. But today, the Ranji Trophy is being won by states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan. And even in IPL games, if you see, many of the players are from these tier 3, tier 4 towns. Many of them don't speak English, and they're very comfortable in their skin. To me, that's new India, which is confidence in their own abilities and confidence in their own strengths. So to me, these entrepreneurs from tier 3, tier 4 towns also mirror the same thing. What is happening in films and in cricket, I think, is being mirrored in entrepreneurs as well. So I think many of the VCs have also begun to understand this. So they have actually begun to go down to some of these small towns in India and begin to have these conversations to figure out who are those people having these wonderful ideas. So for example, Pratik, a colleague of mine at Fundamentum, he grew up in a small town called Rafiganj. His grandfather had migrated from Rajasthan to this small town called Rafiganj in 1942, the year of India's Quit India movement. And he deeply has a sense of understanding of problems in those. For example, there's another entrepreneur who's from a small town called Kodad in Andhra Pradesh, in Suryapet district. He's figured out, for example, that people, have social connections only within the radius of 200 kilometers in most Indian, states. As a result of which, it's very important to build products that acknowledge this fact. So he's building a news information platform which provides information that's relevant and interesting to these people within a 200-kilometer radius. For example, who's getting elected, when is the electricity, power cut going to happen, when is the power going to be restored, who's getting married. So wonderful solution, and that startup is doing well. Dehad, for example, founded by a bunch of people. The founder, one of the founder CEO, Shashank, grew up in a farming family. His father, wanted him to get out of farming because farming was not a lucrative, source of income or a steady source of income. So he wanted him to go out. He went to IIT Delhi, studied there, but felt that there's a big problem, and the time is ripe now to solve this problem profitably. So he came back, assembled a team which was also passionate about farming, and today the company is a unicorn. So they're building a business which is attractive, and they're not building it like the way a business would be built for customers sitting in, for example, Bangalore or Delhi, for example. Convenience is important for these money-rich customers, but convenience is not important for those customers. Value is far more important. So tier 3 middle India cares a lot more for value than they care for convenience. So some of these insights helps you to build your business. For example, farmers for Dehat, they walk 5 kilometers or cycle 5 kilometers to the nearest Dehat center to collect the agricultural, inputs. They don't need to be delivered at home for them because their time is not as precious as the time, that for people like us, for instance. So some of these insights go into building the right kind of businesses. For example, Misho uses their women micro entrepreneurs to also do deliveries, and that's how they've been able to bring down the delivery cost. They don't have a logistics, in-house services provided. So they connect these micro entrepreneurs to other logistics, small players who then do the deliveries in a very economical way. So you need to understand these customers. For example, Razorpay figured out that people are reluctant to do transactions on a platform, e-commerce platform, or on any digital transactions without trust. So they spent a lot of time going to these tier 3 towns, talking to these small and medium businesses and building trust by educating them on how their life could change and how to use these products. So before even selling to them, they tried and created the trust. So middle India, trust really matters a big deal. So very important to create trust for this group. And also it's very important to have low customer acquisition costs. You can't afford to have high CACs for these people. You can't afford to have high churn because their average ticket size, per annum or per month is so low that the moment you have churn, your business is not profitable. So low CAC, low churn, all of these are very important. Low churn happens because of trust. Low churn happens because you build trust in one product line and then begin to launch another product line and another product line. Because of the trust in the first one, they buy from you for the second and third. So I think many of these insights are really essential to build businesses for Middle India.
Right. You spoke of CAC. I think a lot of people here would now know what that is, though we are not a part of the startup ecosystem, maybe because of Shark Tank. But yeah, we get to know all of this. But so passionately you speak about these entrepreneurs. It's very obvious that you spend a lot of time talking to them, to understanding their stories, and that's how you've shared such a beautiful story in about all of these people in your book, which is this also one of the reasons, this passion for entrepreneurship, for startups, to guide and help them? Did that lead to the formation of the Artha School of Entrepreneurship?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I noticed that I've been in the ecosystem for about 20 years, and last 7 years I think I've seen a lot of young founders setting up businesses, and I realized that they're solving problems that have already been solved multiple times before, and therefore the scaling journeys are getting delayed and sometimes impacted very fatally as well. So I was wondering, why can't some of us come together and set up some kind of a school for entrepreneurship and help these founders scale their businesses more seamlessly, help them avoid tripping up, and help them solve problems very quickly, especially those that have been solved before. I mean, there will always be problems that you will be solving for the first time, and there's no escaping that. But a large number of problems that founders are grappling with have been solved multiple times before. So you can accelerate their journeys by helping them with know-how on how to solve those problems.
Sure. And you credit one of the co-founders there also, Suruchi is credited also
Yes.
in the book, right? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Did you meet her at IMIT or
No,
was it?
Suruchi is a
Yeah.
colleague of mine. We
Uh-huh.
worked together at Daksh.
Acha.
So this was a 20-year friendship that
Wow.
has endured.
Okay, very nice. So I think we have very little time left, but I would like to do some, Karan Johar style rapid fire. Let's see. I don't have any fancy hamper to give away, sir, but let's see if this works. So, one book that you repeatedly go back to, for inspiration. Which would that book be?
Yeah, I know. It's not an easy question to answer because there's no one particular book that I keep going back, but there are a few books that I really like. And some of this might surprise you. There is a book by Oscar Wilde on The Happy Prince, for example.
Okay.
It's a book for children,
Right.
but whenever I feel a little depressed, that story never ceases to inspire me and make me feel good.
Sure.
So Oscar Wilde, for example.
Okay, okay. So I'm going to cut my next question, which is your favorite fiction author, but then I think it's something. Is there a separate author?
Khalid Hosseini is Thomas Hardy of yesteryears. So these are some of my favorite authors.
Okay. One essential difference between the Silicon Valley abroad and maybe India's startup capital. One essential difference.
So I think Bangalore has also evolved very significantly, but I think one significant difference is that the academia participation in the ecosystem in India is very weak.
Okay.
So in the Silicon Valley you have Stanford, and for Boston you have, and New York you have MIT. I don't think you have equivalents like that anywhere near in India. So I think that's one of the reasons why doing some original, creative, cutting-edge work, deep tech work is not going to be as easy in India as in the Silicon Valley.
Achha. One overused and perhaps leveraged, understood terminology in the startup ecosystem.
Maybe product market fit. That's a commonly used phrase but it's not properly understood.
Okay.
So I'll just give you an example. Maybe, for example, a 10-minute delivery can create awesome customer experience. But to me, that's not product market fit. Because product market fit is when there's awesome customer experience at a price point that can make your business profitable.
Super. A young entrepreneur that is one of your current favorites.
Well, there's so many of them. It's very difficult to name one. But if I had to name one, I'd pick Samina Bano. Achha. She runs something called Right Walk Foundation, okay, which she uses the idea of right to education in Uttar Pradesh. Mm-hmm. And helped bring almost 1 million children, underprivileged children, got them admission into good schools. Wow. And she's now using apprenticeship, the idea of apprenticeship for creating employment. So she is a huge inspiration for me. Really, wow. And how many books do you read in a year? Surprisingly, I'm not a very voracious reader, although I've written so many books. I'm not a very voracious reader. I read bits and pieces. Okay. I like to read short articles, short insights, whatever comes in on my feed. Some things are good. Last year, for example, I never go with the intention, in 2022, 23, I should read 20 books, 30 books. It's just that I end up reading some number of books which I end up liking. For example, last year, The Maratha Century was a wonderful book that I read. I was fascinated by the story of the Marathas and what would have happened in the Third Battle of Panipat, for example, if they had won and Abdali had lost. So that was an interesting book. I read Deep Thinking by Kasparov. I read, for example, Jobonomics by Gautam Das. I read Indica by Pranay Lal. So wide range of books, but I don't have a count, nor am I a very voracious reader. And how many books do you intend to write this year? This year, I don't think I'll write a book. Okay. It's not easy to get a topic that's big enough for a book or good enough for a book. It's not easy. Okay. But you did share with me that you meet such interesting people on a day-to-day basis. So we are really looking forward to your next book whenever it comes in. And thank you for giving us this treat. It's a treat for all readers, and especially people who want to do something in the startup ecosystem. So it's beautiful. Do we have any time for questions? I am not aware. Do we? Okay. Yeah, there are a couple. So.
Dr. Hari, this is Sensei Raj from Vision India 2032. You did mention, your love for Nehru's vision for India, and also a deeper question, what you threw it out to the audience as well. I would like to take you back to that question. What he said was the Social entrepreneurs need to create the right soil mixture for laying down the foundation for the free market economy. Now, we call ourselves the largest democracy. I think the answer lies in two parts, or if I may, three parts. One is the political will, the narrative for a country. I would say rather building a nation. Because country, we all know how we have come to this particular stage. But are we truly building a nation with the Nehru's vision? One question. So I haven't bothered to answer that. But let's throw the question to all of us within ourselves. What is that quest? So that political will, not in terms of governance, has resulted in reaching out to that 400 million plus and the remaining part who are underserved and still underserved to a majority extent. That has resulted in the digital payments leading up to the cash reserves that we have within a country. The second part to that I would say, is that we have a currency well established, the reserves backing the currency in terms of gold. We have seen that the world has weathered the crises that we have faced in terms of 3 crises since the 70s. But India has weathered those, partly because we were not fully convertible, and partly because we did not bow down to the bullying of the IMF or the World Bank and such. So I'll stop there. But then the next part is beautiful, is that the venture capitals and the investors' money which flows from overseas focuses on those 10 million households, the buying power, which of course is basic business which you and I understand. But then who is going to look after the remaining part of it? So as you said, creating the right soil mixture leading up to the free market economy does come with a shoulder of responsibility that we all have to bear, including you and I and many other investors who look at creating this right mixture for the free market economy, because there's nothing called a free market economy, if you understand. And many people understand this. So are we playing the right game is what I would ask. So instead of...
The gentleman has read your book. He knows it by heart, I'm telling you.
I actually have not. I just
You've
bought a
not?
copy
Okay.
about a minute ago,
But
2 minutes
you've
ago.
got the right paragraphs and the right questions. Superb. Okay.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I'm putting together about 350 economists who advises me.
Super.
So the point being is that, are we asking the right questions? Are we writing the right narrative in order to create the right mixture, the right parameters which are predicated by our political will and our moral will and, of course, the paisa? Right? So all of these 3 things will have to come in, and that's where we have seen the empowerment of that particular section which nobody wanted to care about. So that is the shift from the Nehru's vision to India's vision. Sorry to blow that bubble. I'm not a big Nehru fan, nor the Gandhi fan either, which have taken on the likes in the West as well. We relate to our nation, our civilization, not to the political narrative. I think that's a very strong message why the folks from the tier 2, tier 3 are getting to the entrepreneur scene. And now, of course, the wide-eyed investors are flocking to them. It should have happened much before. Let's draw a parallel to our bigger neighbor, China.
Yeah. Other authors, but I think...
Thank you very much.
Those questions in terms of political will, I think, would you want to... Yeah, you've already answered a lot in the book. Yeah, so, yeah.
Yes, my question to Mr. Hari is, since he has started his entrepreneurship school also, see, we lack innovators in our country. See, for semiconductors, we are dependent on small countries like Taiwan or Israel or any other countries. Most of the top cream who pass out from our business schools as well as technology schools, they want to migrate to other countries. What ails our country for this type of innovators? As such, I still don't understand, even though we have IITs, IIMs, and IISc also here. Is it because of the politics that is played in the corporates? Or is it, I don't think income is a criteria as such.
I'll just try to answer this in maybe 1 or 2 minutes. It's a very difficult question to answer why some nations are what they are. I think many people have tried to find answers to questions like this, and that's the reason why Jared Diamond has written a book called Guns, Germs and Steel, where he tries to answer the question as to why Americas were colonized by Europe, Indians in America, which is the American Indians were colonized by Europeans, and not vice versa. Why didn't the Indians go and colonize Europe? We try to answer some questions like these, why some nations are what they are. So the answers are very difficult. So to me, I think, entrepreneurship to me, if you read, Edmund Phelps' book, Mass Entrepreneurship, he demystifies this, and he says, great economies are not created by, cool entrepreneurs like, Ford or an Elon Musk. It happens when millions of people are inspired by modern ideas and feel like solving problems. They feel empowered that they're able to solve problems. That's when economies develop. To this, I would add one more thing, which is investment in science and research is very essential. And a lot of research and science, investments in research and science won't give you immediate returns. Therefore, profit-seeking capital won't go there. It has to be philanthropy capital. So I think investment in science and research is very fundamental. And over a period of time, it creates the right kind of innovations. Probably that also has not happened in a country like India. It's a very difficult question to answer, and answers are no simple answer to this anyway.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Hari, for that beautiful session. Thank you, Sneha, for moderating it so well and bringing out the insights of the book to all of us. Well, two important things. We have a day packed with multiple authors and multiple sessions happening. You are free to ask questions. Please keep it short so that others also get an opportunity. Anything you would like to discuss further, our respected authors are available. You may please discuss with them outside. Also, the books are available at the counter near the registration. Authors are available. Get your copies signed by them. That's a memory to hold on to. Thank you so much, Mr. Hari, for the session.
Thank you, Hari.